Hey everybody, thank you for watching today's video devotion. We are in the book of Hebrews chapter 7 as part of our New Testament reading plan. And remember that the author is writing the book of Hebrews, this letter, if you will, to Christians, to believers, followers of Jesus who are of a Jewish background. They have a Jewish heritage. They were Jews who became Christians. And one of the temptations they faced was, after getting saved through Jesus and faith, to at some point maybe return back to Judaism or observance of the law. We saw that as a problem quite often in Corinthians and Romans. There were the Judaizers who said, well, yeah, you have to be saved through Jesus, but then you need to be circumcised and keep all these Jewish rituals. So there's always the temptation for believers who had a Jewish background to kind of revert back to some of the trappings of Judaism. And the author is addressing that temptation, that tendency, and trying to help them understand, no, that's a mistake. You don't need to do that, and that you don't keep your salvation or earn salvation by obeying the law. And so in chapter 7 and following, he's trying to help them understand that Jesus Christ and his priesthood and the ministry, the new covenant through Christ, is superior to the Old Testament priesthood, the Old Testament covenant. And he does that in several different ways. So in chapter 7, he's helping us understand that Jesus' priesthood is higher in rank than the priesthood of the Levites. Remember, Aaron was the first high priest, and then his descendants, the Levites, were the priests in Israel because they were born into that tribe. And so he says Jesus is of a higher rank. So why would you want to go back to the old system? And to help them understand how Jesus' priesthood is superior to that of Aaron and the Levites, the Jewish priest, he goes back to an incident in Genesis chapter 14 when Melchizedek was a priest who received a tithe from Abraham, and said that Jesus' priesthood is similar. That Melchizedek's priesthood was a type similar to Jesus' priesthood, and that Melchizedek's priesthood was superior to the Levites or to the Aarons or the Jewish priest, and therefore Jesus' priesthood is superior. Now, in Genesis 14, and then we'll read some in chapter 7 of Hebrews in just a moment, but in Genesis 14 and verse 18, after Abraham had led his army to defeat another army that had taken Lot, his nephew, as a prisoner, and so he freed Lot and his possessions, on their way back home, Melchizedek, king of Salem, who was also a priest. So Melchizedek, both a king and a priest. He's king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High, and he blessed him. Melchizedek blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abram." His name had not been changed to Abraham yet. "Blessed be Abram of God Most High." Abram was God's servant, possessor of heaven and earth. "And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." And he, Abraham, gave him, Melchizedek, a tenth of all. So Melchizedek is a high priest of the Most High God. He's the king of Salem. He blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives a tithe, 10% of the spoils of that battle, to Melchizedek. Now we're back to Hebrews. And so he's going to make the point. Melchizedek is of a higher priesthood than the Jewish priesthood through Aaron and the Levites. And since Jesus' priesthood has similarities to Melchizedek, his is higher too. So he's making the point to Jewish believers, okay? And it's a very tedious thing, but it's a beautiful thing. Verse 1 of chapter 7. "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham when he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him." So Melchizedek is king of Salem, priest, blessed Abraham. Verse 2, "To whom also Abraham appointed a tenth, a tithe of all the spoils, was first of all by the translation of his name, King of Righteousness." In other words, Melchizedek means righteousness. And then also King of Salem, which is the King of Peace, because the word Salem is connected to the Jewish word, the Hebrew word shalom, so he was peace. So here he's king and priest, and he's righteous, and he's the King of Peace. peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest perpetually. Now, this does not mean that Melchizedek was an angel or some kind of spiritual being. He was a man. But in Genesis, because Melchizedek's only referred to twice in the Bible outside of Hebrews, that account in Genesis 14 and then a passage in the book of Psalms. And we know nothing about Melchizedek's family line. The Jewish priests were priests because they were born into the family, the tribe of Levi. So they had to be blood relations to that tribe to be a priest, irregardless of their moral character or their spiritual character. Well, Melchizedek, there's nothing told to us about his genealogy. So it's like he is eternal. He's really not, but it's like that. And so the point he goes on to make is that Jesus Christ is the eternal priest. He's not a priest because he was born of a certain bloodline. In fact, he goes on in chapter 7 to tell us that if Jesus had been on earth, Jesus would not have qualified as a Jewish priest because he was not a Levite. Jesus was born of the tribe of Judah. And then he goes on in verses 4 through 10 in Hebrews 7 to talk about how Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek. And interestingly, he says all of the Jewish priests were in the loins of Abraham, because remember, Abraham was the father of the Jewish people. So all the Jewish descendants came from Abraham. The tribe of Levi, came from Abraham. He would have been Levi's great-grandfather. So the tribe of right on down, Levi. So all of these priests would have been descendants. Are you with me? Descendants of Abraham, and Abraham is giving a tithe to Melchizedek. So in essence, all the Jewish priests were tithing through Abraham to Melchizedek, which made Melchizedek superior to the Jewish priest. And he says in here, Jesus is similar to Melchizedek, so therefore he is above the Jewish priest. He's greater. Now look at verse 11 of chapter 7. He said, now, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek, not be designated according to the order of Aaron? He said, if somebody could be saved through the law and through the priesthood of Aaron, the Levitical priesthood, there was not a need for there to be another priest, Jesus, similar to Melchizedek. And so nobody could really get saved through keeping the law. So another priest was needed, a higher priest with a different way. And so he goes on to say that down in verses 20 and following, all right, that the Jewish priests, the Levitical priests, were priests because they were blood descendants of the tribe of Levi. But Jesus, no. Jesus was actually the tribe of Judah, so he wouldn't have qualified. But Jesus is a priest, he says down there in verses 20 and 21 and so on, because God swore an oath that there would be a priest higher than the Levitical priest, a priest like Melchizedek, who would be a priest forever. So Jesus is the only one who was made a priest by the oath, the statement of God. So the Father, through his spoken word, declared Jesus to be our great high priest, which makes him higher than the Jewish priesthood. And it's pretty potent stuff. And he also goes on in the rest of this chapter to, and we don't have time to read all the verses or we'll be here all day, to say that there were many Levitical priests. They all died. Jesus is one priest and he's an eternal priest, and therefore he saves us forever. So he makes a lot of detailed arguments in here. Here's the bottom line. Melchizedek, his priesthood was higher than the Levitical priesthood. Okay? Because Abraham gave a tithe to him, and therefore all the Jewish priests were through Abraham, in a sense, tithing to Melchizedek. Also, Melchizedek blessed Abraham, which would make him superior to Abraham. He says, then Jesus' priesthood is more like Melchizedek's priesthood than the Levitical priesthood, which makes Jesus' priesthood higher than the Levitical priesthood. And because Jesus is an eternal priest, he doesn't die, he's alive forever, salvation is forever. So it's an argument on the basis of Jewish tradition to believers of a Jewish background to say to them that Jesus is the great high priest, so far above the Levitical priesthood, why would you ever be tempted to go back to Judaism? Why would you ever be tempted to go back to the sacrifices in the temple or the tabernacle? Why would you ever be tempted to go back to the law? Now, that doesn't apply to us as much because we're Gentiles who became believers. We're not tempted to go back to Judaism. We are, however, tempted to legalism. We are tempted to say, all right, I'm saved by my faith in Jesus, but I remain saved by doing good works. And what he says in here is that the Levitical priesthood and the law could never save anybody. We needed a new way. And then tomorrow we'll look at in chapter 8, that new way, that new covenant. So as a Christian, don't be tempted to get saved by faith, but remain saved by good works. We're saved by faith and we remain saved by faith. The good works are the product of our faith. And because we have Jesus, our great high priest, our salvation is eternal and it is secure. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.